one of the things when I came to SpaceX that really was like, oh my God, this is like what I was looking for. This is what I was missing. And it's not easy, right? Like there's a lot of nuance to it that you don't actually expect until you kind of start to run into.
What that mindset is and kind of what cultural elements are needed to foster it.
The first thing with the responsible engineer is it's an ownership model. It's not about owning your thing as this special thing that is only yours and yours alone.
Hello and welcome to the Leadership Launchpad, where we help technical managers improve themselves, their teams, and their organizations. If you are a technical leader, an engineer or technician looking to become a leader, or someone who supports technical leaders, this is the show to get actionable insights from people who have been in the trenches and gone through the journey of becoming a people leader themselves. Our guest today is Seth Kovnat, the Director of Vehicle Engineering at Impulse Space. I will let Seth tell a little bit more about the company, but at a high level, Impulse was founded by Tom Mueller, the first employee at SpaceX and the person behind the most successful rocket engine in history, the Merlin 1D. The goal of the company is to unlock efficient in-space mobility, basically with SpaceX and others solving the problem of getting to space. Impulse wants to solve the problem of getting around once you are there. For Seth, his journey took him through many different stops in the aerospace world. He spent 5 years at Instar Engineering, 6 years at Piasecki Aircraft, and 6 years at SpaceX. As SpaceX's head of payload accommodation architecture, Seth built out the modular mission infrastructure required to drive Falcon from 24 to 148 launches per year and beyond, rewriting the rules for launch accommodations while overseeing more payloads to orbit than anyone in history at that time. As the director of vehicle engineering, Seth now directs all vehicle development at Impulse. During this time, he has also published a book, written many blog posts about what it takes to execute at a high level in engineering. So I am really excited for the conversation today. Seth, welcome to the Leadership Launchpad.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, I am too, because like I said, you're clearly someone who has spent a good amount of time kind of thinking about what it takes to not just be a good engineer, but to create a good engineering culture. And I want to start though with a little bit of a different trajectory because you wrote a children's book. So I'd love to start with what tell listeners like what's the book about? What made you decide to write it? What was that experience like? Let's start there.
Yeah, so the book's called The Know-How of Knowing How, and it's focused on just kind of what to do with an idea, but I kind of took a very engineering focused approach to writing it. Yeah, I have 3 kids, have seen a lot of the books that are out there, and I would always get excited about finding an engineering or scientific type of focused book, and always came away extremely dissatisfied with the conclusions, right? Like where you would get to the end and they didn't actually tell you anything about how to actually go about doing the thing that they said that they were gonna go tell you about. And so as I've gone through my career, I've really thought about how can I distill engineering down, especially like development engineering, which is something that I guess really isn't talked about very much in literature. How could I go and kind of detail out for new engineers or people who want to get into development engineering that just haven't had that opportunity, what that process looks like? And as I went through the process of trying to write that particular book, I kept simplifying things down more and more and more. And then I realized that it wasn't actually an engineering book at all anymore. It was actually like a just how to create type of book.
I
And
love it.
it was like as simple as it was simple enough that it could be a children's book. And so then I started to kind of get into like the rhyming themes and working with like having fun with words and and it kinda led to the book that it is today.
That's really interesting. What was the hardest part? Was it just like the initial ideas, the simplifying the ideas, the rhyming? That would be really hard for me. Like what where was the hardest part, do you think, of the whole process?
I kind of approached it like I approach any engineering problem, like where I'm trying to develop a thing. And so, it was a lot of collaboration where I would write something initially and it would be pretty bad. And
Yeah.
then I would keep massaging it and massaging it and massaging it. And then at one point I brought an editor in to kind of independently give me feedback, and then I kept massaging it from there. And then, as I worked with my cousin who I had illustrated, we realized that there were a lot of opportunities to massage it some more so that it worked with the illustrations as we
Yeah.
kind of dug into that. And it just evolved over and over and over again until it became a refined piece of work. And it was very much done the way that I really approach engineering, which is kind of fun because that's like what it's all about.
Yeah. That's really interesting. The thing that makes me think about is because going back to SpaceX, since we both have a common history like in SpaceX, one of the things I always find funny is, especially with early Falcon 9, there was all kinds of arguments outside or consternation outside of SpaceX in like space circles of like the constant renaming of the architecture. It's like it's Falcon 9 V 1.1, and then it's Falcon 9 full thrust, and then it's like they just kept like changing naming conventions. And just as you're talking about it, I'm reflecting on my process for writing a book and like process for different projects. And I almost feel like the developmental process today, because of the tools that we have available to us, versioning is it's like really hard because like it's just such
Yeah,
it's true continuous improvement. Like there's sometimes you change a word, sometimes you change a whole chapter. It's just like it's just constant massaging, as you say. And so it just I feel like the whole architecture of V1, V2, like it breaks down.
it really does. It's hard to kind of like draw a line at, what you call like block upgrades,
Yeah,
that kind of thing.
yeah, yeah. Awesome. Okay. Well, I want to get back to that, get back to the idea of like, how you function well, how you create a strong function engineering team. But before we do that, I do want to ask you to go into a little more detail about Impulse and kind of your role and your team's role within it. What from, I have followed it from the outside for a long time, but, what's the latest and greatest? I know you just closed Series D, I believe. And like,
Yeah.
so where's the company going now and what part in that is your team playing?
My team is responsible for all the vehicles, and when it comes down to it, a lot of it is the structures and the mechanisms and that kind of thing, but it's also the systems, right? Like how all the systems play together, taking all of the advanced propulsion that we've got and all the advanced avionics and all of these other systems and putting them all together to form them into vehicles. So, a lot of what I do is like really orchestrate, make sure that across all of the different vehicle platforms that we're developing, that we are really leveraging what all the different puzzle pieces that we've developed throughout the time. Are we developing the correct puzzle pieces that are going to be useful for this thing over here versus this other vehicle over there? And coming to a little bit of an efficiency as we're rapidly developing new space vehicles.
Yeah, and because right now are there just 2, Mira and Helios? Are there
We
more?
have Mira, we have Helios, we have a couple of government vehicles that are similar, and then we have, like, the lunar lander
That's right.
architecture that we're just getting started on that we're
Yeah.
hoping to accelerate.
Awesome, awesome. So, yeah, so you really are I like how you use the word you're orchestrating, have you ever read the book or heard of the book Team of Teams?
Actually, no.
So, Team of Teams is a book by General Stanley McChrystal, who he was the head of special forces. He was a special forces commander in Iraq back in like 2007 and 8. And he talked about how he had all these great teams. He has Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and they're great individual teams, but they would struggle to work together and they would kind of get in each other's way. And I always felt at SpaceX, at a lot of hardware companies, it nobody can win on their own. They're all having to work together. They're all these great, amazing teams, but working together can sometimes be difficult. And so it sounds like your role is being that binder of allowing them to work together. Is that kind of described correctly?
It is, yeah, and, like, we have a lot of people who do that also, including on my own teams, right? And that's kind of the culture I like to foster is it's, kind of the responsible engineer mentality is to orchestrate, right? To be the orchestra maestro from your own hardware's perspective, right? Like, you are focused on your hardware, but you're orchestrating all of the work and all of the stakeholders and whatnot to all kind of coalesce and get it done, right?
Yeah.
And so, that happens at every level. If that can happen at every single level, where at like a piece part level, that person, there's a responsible engineer who's really pushing their hardware through and orchestrating it to get done. And then you get to the assembly level and then the vehicle level. And then now, at my role, it's kind of like across vehicles, like making sure that it all works and that it's all advocated for. That is the responsible engineer mindset, really.
That mindset might be a great place to kind of start diving into more of the leadership and cultural aspects of this. And I think you may be, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you might be one of the perfect people to answer this because, as you said, as we were talking before we hit record, had a 10-year career before you started at SpaceX. You were in
Yeah.
other aerospace companies. And this idea of the responsible engineer is something that comes up again and again. I got exposed to it at SpaceX. I hear a lot about it at other companies. And a lot of companies talk about it and more of the mindset of it as one of the key pieces to success at a lot of these companies. From your perspective, maybe I don't know if they already had that culture at some of the other companies that you were at, or if it was a new thing. Help me define what that mindset is and kind of what cultural elements are needed to foster it, what leadership is needed to foster it, what makes it different?
I think you're right. The career I had before SpaceX really did not have that, really. And that,
Okay.
that was like one of the things when I came to SpaceX that really was like, oh my God, this is like what I was looking for. This is what I was missing. And that was just the mindset that you could actually own it all, right? From soup to nuts and not just like a piece of it, right?
Hmm.
I like to think about those like Dilbert comics where it was, kind of portraying engineering as being this very boring type of thing. And it's funny because it's like to me it's the opposite. It's extremely creative. It's
Yeah.
extremely just encompassing and, like, I didn't really see that picture come together until I was at SpaceX and I kinda got exposed to the responsible engineer mentality, and, the responsible engineer, that whole kind of philosophy is often misconstrued and not it's similar to, like, the books that, I would reference like I was referencing earlier with the children's books that never satisfied me, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That they never really gave me the answer, like, a lot of places that I've observed, whether I worked there or worked with people at those other companies, a lot of them kinda like to talk about the responsible engineer, but not actually like, know really what it is, like, in their
Yeah.
bones. That is, definitely something that I've thought about quite a bit. It's something that we've been implementing at Impulse, and it's not easy. There's a lot of nuance to it that you don't actually expect until you kinda start to run into, different, like, nuances there. So, the first thing with the responsible engineer is it's an ownership model, right? It's all about owning but it's about owning the outcome, right? It's not about owning your thing as this special thing that is only yours and yours alone, right? And that is like probably the biggest misnomer is like it's got to work, right? That's like the outcome is what matters.
Yes.
And
Yes.
like if you go into it feeling like you are the owner and you're the only all the ideas have to come from you and you alone and you get just put your head down and go to work you're gonna have pretty bad outcomes. Like, you may actually have good hardware outcomes, but, like,
Yeah.
you will burn out, right? Or you will it's not gonna be as strong as it could be, right? Because you didn't engage with the people that you really needed to, and really, you didn't get the feedback that you really could have used to make your ideas bulletproof, right? Because the outcome is what you care about most. So, the whole RE mentality, it's all about owning the outcome, and to do that, I kinda have, like, 3 main focal points for, like, what that means, right? And that is, you own it. You're not a task rabbit. You're not just, like, doing tasks, you own it, right? You have a plan. You know what the goalposts are. You know what success looks like, and you have a plan, right? And then the last one is you have no ego attached to what the actual solution is. You're just wanting to engage with as many people, even the biggest adversaries that you could possibly have, to have them throw as many stones as possible at it, break it, try to make it bulletproof, and do that as early as possible so that you can come out of it with the strongest possible product that you can. So those are like kind of distilling it down into like just like those three things: ownership,
Yeah.
having a plan, having low or no ego. But that's kind of my worldview for that.
So then I like, kind of double clicking on the idea of owning the outcome. Then is it kind of looking at your career or what you're trying to achieve and how you move forward? It's kind of like owning, and I might be saying this wrong. Would you consider it's like your goal is owning larger and larger outcomes? It's like at first you're just responsible for making sure a mechanism releases correctly or something like that, versus you're now responsible for making sure all of the vehicles are working harmoniously together and making sure they're all making maximum utilization of the pieces that you have. And again, it's not, even if it's the mechanism separating as it's supposed to, the mechanism isn't the part, isn't the thing that you're owning. It's the separation that you're owning. Am I thinking about that correctly as a
Yeah,
non-engineer myself?
yeah, that's exactly right. Yep.
Okay. So then as a leader, how do you think about then making sure you're creating an environment where that mindset spreads throughout your team and the rest of the organization? You mentioned it's difficult for an organization to have this because I imagine, I've worked at companies before where something that would often come up is the idea of like the weaponization of values, where, you say never give up is a value. And it means you just like bulldoze over everybody. That would be like weaponization of the value. So I imagine that's part, it's like one, you got to get these ideas out there, but you also got to make sure the nuance is there that people don't go too far with them. So, yeah, how do you think about it as a leader of making sure these are applied appropriately?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, because there's, I would say, like, a hierarchy that does exist where, like, there's an owner for a vehicle, there's an owner within that vehicle for, like, individual systems within it, and so on. And then, there's, like, at my level, ownership across the vehicles. There are paths to escalate when, you cannot
Mm,
agree necessarily on what the priority is, like, who
yeah.
gets the resources, that kinda thing. And that makes it more important to be communicative and to make sure that, like, you're talking early, you're planning even earlier to make sure that everybody's prepared for what you're sending their way, and you're not just showing up at the 11th hour and saying, "I need to test this thing." Like, "Well, that wasn't planned for. I understand that it's, like, a high priority thing, but, like, a little notice would be helpful." So, that's like that kinda goes back to, like, orchestra maestro, right? Like, that's kind of like the analogy I like to use the most for the RE is, like, you're an orchestra maestro. You need to be living and breathing with your hardware or whatever you're owning all the way through, end to end. Test you're gonna have, like, a lot of different people helping you along the way. There's test resources, there's manufacturing, there's everything that you could possibly imagine, and you need to be maestroing everybody so that they know what's coming. You're not only like telling them, "Hey, heads up, this is happening," but you're also allowing them to steer the design even, right? And like you're taking their inputs. You're not only taking their inputs, you're like really trying to pull those inputs in. Like you're, demanding like, "Hey, please tell me that this isn't stupid, right? And that
Yeah.
this isn't going to get us into trouble. How can I make this even easier for you?" And you're not going to be able to just use all of that feedback. You have to be a filter for it to take the best and kind of put the puzzle together so that it works in like the most pragmatic sense.
It feels very much like kind of the discussion we had earlier about versioning and how it's very much like a living process and constantly changing. It
Yeah.
sounds kind of similar in that it's not that there's like clear lines of like you receive feedback here, you give outputs to here. Like it's always subject to what's the best outcome and just constantly shifting whatever you need to shift to get the best outcome.
Yes, it's not a linear process by any means, and I
That's a good way to
I
put
I
it.
do I do think that the more aggressive you are early on when the knowledge is low, the more aggressive you are at accepting the churn and, like, really trying to, like, get all those inputs and put the whole soup together, the better you're setting yourself up to have a very clear path to execute,
Yeah.
as opposed to, like, just starting to run in a direction without really, having scoped out the full vision, right?
Yeah.
In that case, a lot of times you get very expensive or pretty costly, from a schedule or whatever have you, you run into a lot of problems that way. So I'm a big proponent of, again, having that plan, having a roadmap. What does your goalpost look like?
Mhm.
How do you see yourself getting there? What do you see as the technical or schedule or any other types of risks that might be lurking that you might want to go and attack first? And you attack those risks with reckless abandon. Like you just go and you attack them, and you don't just like gravitate to the things that you already know, right?
Yeah.
If you go and attack the things that you already know, then all of those other things are still lurking, and they will be a risk to you to bring it all the way back to that common denominator, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I imagine that's something that you as a leader are constantly having to reinforce. Yeah, because it's like I always think about just the levels of it's always interesting to look at different companies and think about where they start and what they try to show off. And if somebody's if a new launch company is like trying to just get out the gate and show that they and make the most quote unquote progress, it's like let's build some tanks because like hey, tanks are big, they show we got these huge structures, but really it's
Yeah.
like prop is going to be a big problem. And so if you're not starting with prop, like you're going to run into problems.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I'm not opposed to building early. I love to build things
Yeah.
early, and and that's not what I'm saying at all.
Yeah.
Just when you do, it needs to be done intentionally, right?
Yeah.
In fact, everything's got to be done intentionally. Even the things that you are intentionally doing, like you're intentionally saying to yourself, "This is not a big deal." Okay, do that intentionally, right? So when you
Yes.
decide to build something early, if you don't know what your metric is that you're actually looking for, or like what kind of measurements you're trying to take out of the thing, whether that is like, can we build it this way? Or like, we're going to try this process, or I just want to see what the fits look like, or I want to try to test this thing and like make sure that my test actually works, that test setup. There's like a million reasons why you can do those things, and they're all valid reasons to go and build something early. But if you are just building to build, that's where like Bill Gerstenmaier, who worked with him at SpaceX for a little bit, he used to say, "Fail smart, don't fail stupid."
Yeah.
right? And there's a million ways you can fail stupid, right? And like really it comes down to just not being intentional and not actually having something that you're measuring to, and you're just kind of going blind because you've got the illusion of progress that like you are building something.
Yeah, I'm looking over here at my bookshelf next to me that you can't see because Amy Edmondson, who people may know her for her work on psychological safety, but her most recent book is about failing smart, and I can't find it off the top of like as I briefly look, but yeah, and it's those it's that same kind of idea that
Yeah.
that you were just saying there. Awesome, yeah, okay, so that's kind of at a high level, like the culture that you're trying to push before we leave. I know we're getting kind of close on time here. I do want to kind of rewind the clock a little bit too. Talk about your journey as a leader, especially these last few years. So now you're talking about like orchestrating vehicles across a whole line of vehicles. We're talking about building this responsible engineering culture. But when you think back to when you first started leading people, what were what were some of the biggest surprises or challenges that you run into that, you would expect other people in your shoes probably face as they first become a people leader?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big one is, it's very difficult as someone who's owned hardware to go from, like, owning hardware to, like, leading people where you need to relinquish that technical ownership to those people, right? Like, and allow them to have their own curiosity and to explore their own decisions and making their hardware good. And so, like that I think is like by and large the biggest challenge, especially
Yeah.
for like high performing technical leaders as they get into management.
Yeah. Just since we just talked about it, is there a parallel there? Because like when I think about the responsible engineer, as you talked about it, and there's kind of like a hierarchy there. Is there any similarities there in terms of like if you're, the RE for a vehicle, you're not necessarily, holding on to you're releasing some of the responsibility, or
Yeah.
maybe not the responsibility, but release some of that for like the subsystems. Is there a connection there?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that's how we try to structure our organization is like you have people who are owning the vehicle and they are the manager or the lead of a
Yeah.
team that is developing the individual pieces of the vehicle, right? And so it's a natural way to organize the team, but it's also a natural way to think about relinquishing that control,
Yeah. Yeah. There's
technical
a
authority.
yeah, there's a book called Traction that talks about a system I've talked about on the podcast before that's called EOS, that stands for the Entrepreneurial Operating System. And one of the things that that book has a chapter on kind of flipping the idea of an org chart. And you think of your standard org chart of a company, and it says, no, don't do an org chart, do an accountability chart. And it
Yeah,
sounds, where it's just like you think about all the, you pretend no one worked at the company and just think about what are all the responsible things, what are all the functions that have to happen as in order for that company to do whatever it is it needs to do, and then you put people in those rather than just like having it be personality driven or whatever it is that often happens in an org chart. So it sounds like, the what you're trying to do is kind of merging those just in much the same way.
yeah, yeah. That's exactly right.
Awesome, awesome. Well, yeah, because I 100% agree with you. The responsible engineer piece is something that everybody talks about. Everybody says it, and it's not often described very well. And
Yeah,
so thank you for, giving a few of those tenets. Again, I can tell, it makes sense that you would be able to break it down that way because you were writing a book for engineers and then you just kept simplifying it until it became a book for kids, which is fantastic. Sounds like just the kind of book that kids need these days when it's all about building things. I think that's kind of the name of the game in the world of AI. So, really glad to have you on the show. I'll make sure to put a link to the book, put a link to the careers page for Impulse. It's been great chatting with you because I know you all are doing some amazing things right now.
yeah. Appreciate it. This was fun.